Let's analyze all of this now with Michael Bociurkiw. He's a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. He joins me now in studio. Michael, it's really good to have you on set with us here in Istanbul. There's a lot to unpack here, several developments today. We're going to start with these drone attacks taking place in Russia. We've seen this become a more frequent thing over the last few weeks. They are being blamed on Ukraine, who has claimed responsibility for some of them. But with Vladimir Zelensky saying he's taking this war to Russia, is this the right move by launching such attacks on the Russian capital, given that even their closest ally, like the US, says, don't do it?
I would think so. You know, for the longest time, this has been a kind of David and Goliath type of war with Russia willingly striking deep inside of Ukraine with long-range cruise missiles. These are missiles, by the way, that are capable of destroying very, very big ships, and also waves and waves of drones. And yet Ukraine has been held back from striking within Russia. I think what's happening now is Ukraine feels it's taking matter more into its own hands and striking deep within Russia. I think the other thing that's happening here, because if we're looking at the directions from some of these drones are coming, is they're probing Russian defenses and seeing where the weaknesses are. This may be the beginning of something bigger. And then finally, you know, this is also a new war. It's a war of high tech. And we're seeing all kinds of technology, including these drones being used to get back at the aggressors. So it's a very interesting set of developments, not without risk, of course, because Russia does make a habit of striking back, especially on those very, very big hits.
Where do you think Russia will strike back here? What will they do?
Well, you know, when Ukraine struck the Kerch Bridge, especially the first time, we all thought that they're going to hit back very hard, even strike the presidential compound in the center of Kiev. That really didn't happen. I think we're at a stage right now where the air defenses have improved to the point, you know, with Patriot missiles and things like that, where Russia capabilities to strike at will in Ukraine is quite limited, especially around Kiev. But of course, there are places where I'm based, like Odessa, that are still quite exposed, Lviv in Western Ukraine, places like that. And one more point, it sends a chill down everyone's back, but another kind of potential weapon Russia has is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They control it. Who knows what they have planned for that.
And of course, nobody wants to see anything happen there because of the ramifications of that. You were mentioning that you're based in Odessa. Over the last few hours, we've seen the first ship from Odessa port, this Hong Kong flagship, making its way through the Istanbul Strait from this humanitarian corridor. That's quite a big deal, isn't it? But what's the bigger picture with that?
Yeah, it's a huge deal. And also, by the way, for the people of Odessa, because there are basically two industries in Odessa. One is the port, and the other is travel, entertainment, that sort of thing. So it was met with great applause there. But, you know, a lot of people are employed by the maritime industry in Odessa. And I spoke to some of them before coming here, and they said, yes, the risks are very, very huge, where they're not so sure all crews will sign on for this. I think once this backlog of ships is cleared, what will happen is perhaps Ukraine will test grain, those bulk carriers to come in and out. My argument is that Russia is holding the world hostage right now when it comes to food, and Ukraine should be provided with the ability of NATO allies or Western allies to provide not only air surveillance for these ships going through the corridor, but also armed escorts. This is food destined for some of the world's most desperate markets, desperate populations, and the world cannot allow Russia to hold these types of shipments hostage.
Do you think Russia wants the world to become more reliant on it for its grain?
Clearly, that's the strategy as I see it on behalf of Mr. Putin's strategy. I think what we've seen in the past few days, the Russians striking not only Odessa port, but also further towards the border of Moldova, the Danube River ports. They're trying to decimate Ukraine's ability to export, hence forcing the world to rely on their exports. And Russia, by the way, had a bumper crop this year. They're desperate to get it out. Excuse me, they need the foreign income. But they were not successful earlier in terms of negotiating. They didn't get the sanctions relief that they were asking for. So this is now their strategy.
One of the other strategies it seems that Russia's using here is improving its relationships with what it sees as allies, like China. We've had these drills now in the East China Sea. That's, of course, happening amid the backdrop of the Ukraine war and this meeting that's going to take place between Biden and his Japanese and South Korean counterpart. So what type of game then is Russia trying to play with that and its strategic relationship with China?
Well, of course, Russia would always like to look like a superpower, but let's not kid ourselves. At the end of the day, China is the senior partner. In fact, I think if Mr. Xi Jinping wanted to, he could pick up the phone and tell Mr. Putin, okay, that's it, no more war in Ukraine. And by the way, let's not forget, let's go back a couple of years where China and Ukraine had very robust commercial trading relationships. Mr. Zelensky called China, it's one of its most promising economic partners. So I think, look, I've been based in Hong Kong and Asia, and I know the Chinese mind quite well. At the end of the day, they will choose their own self-interest, their economic interests. So I think if it gets too painful, this war, when it comes to grain or energy or migration, China will, and they do have the leverage to tell Russia to put the gunpowder away, so to speak.
Who else has the leverage to say to Russia, look, things need to change?
Sure. Well, Mr. Erdogan, I think, is one of the few world leaders who has Mr. Putin, so to speak, on speed dial. And I think the two leaders do respect each other. And of course, Turkey, as you well know, has deep economic ties diplomatic ties with Ukraine. So I do hope this summit between the two leaders does happen here in Istanbul. And I think being the pragmatic leader that Mr. Erdogan is, can talk some sense into Mr. Putin. The Russians are becoming very, very isolated. They can't afford to lose friends right now, especially a major partner like Turkey.
And when we talk about Russian friends, the BRICS summit is coming up in the next few days. I know you're headed to Johannesburg to cover that. But many African countries and others in the BRICS alliance still have very strong relationship with Russia, don't they?
They do, but at the Atlantic Council, we're detecting, we have many Africa experts, by the way, we're detecting that there's a lot of restlessness among African leaders on Russia's actions, especially the weaponization of food. It's becoming more difficult for them to get grain. You're seeing this play itself out also in the UN General Assembly. In 2014, there were some African countries that didn't condemn the illegal annexation of Crimea, but when it came to the invasion last year, they were all on the side of the West, so to speak. So we will see Ukraine very, very important at the BRICS summit, and I think we'll see some strong statements for this war to end.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be probably the most important summit
Yes.
to date. Michael Bociurkiw, it's been really great to get your analysis and views on all of this. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.